The Sandy and Toddcast is a Mindgarden Media podcast in association with
Screw You, Todd
Productions. It's another week. That means it's another Sandy and Toddcast. She's Sandy.
He's Todd.
And this week, it's an Empathecary podcast here on the Sandy and Toddcast.
All things empathecary. If you are an empath or you know one, love one this week, well, it's especially for you.
And what we're doing now is we're basically doing Empathecary podcast within the Sandy and Toddcast, so we make time for them and can actually talk about some of the things that fall into that category. So that's what we're doing this week. Season 5, Episode 8. It's an Empathecary podcast on the Sandy and Toddcast.
I'm Vicki Hackbarth, owner of Chakra Awakening, LLC. I'm a certified Reiki master providing services which include past life karma clearing. Karma from your past lives affect you today. Karma is the memory of our souls, which often stem from prior lives. What we didn't finish then, we come back to finish now. Unpleasant situations are the consequence of lingering karma, which can be reversed and resolved. I can help you clear the past life karma carried over from former lifetimes. For more information, find me on Facebook at Chakra Awakening, LLC.
Broadcasting from two very different yet magical places not found on any map. Get ready to discuss the strange, weird, ghostly, crazy, spooky, and odd things that take place around us each and every day. All while having a little bit of fun. This is the Sandy and Toddcast.
We already did the whole she's Sandy, he's Todd thing, so we're not going to do that again, okay?
Halfway through the intro, I thought to myself, don't we usually do that in the next part? I was like so confused. You know what else struck me though? Is that you said that something about it's an empathecary so that we actually do it and keep up with it.
Yeah.
And it made me kind of chuckle internally because, Todd, we have some of the best ideas in the world. And we talk about them and we get all excited about them. And then we get so busy, we can never keep them up. So I thought that this is a great idea to incorporate Empathecary into the Sandy and Toddcast occasionally, because that way we really do force ourselves to talk about it. And I think it's such an important topic to talk about, being an empath or knowing and loving an empath, because people who know and or love an empath, well, they go through a lot of times just as much as the empath does, because they have to react to the way the empath lives and reacts to things around them.
It's, I'll be honest with you, it's kind of being an empath can be a curse and also a gift, but knowing and loving an empath is definitely also a gift and a curse.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very cursy. Mm-hmm. Very cursy. I feel very bad for people who, have to deal with that bullshit.
Yeah. And especially even for me, before I even realized I was an empath, Dave would kind of look at me weird and scratch his head when I would do or say weird things, be all excited to go into a store that I wanted to check out or a restaurant and eat. And then we pull up and I'm like, no, I think we should go someplace else tonight. And he'd be like, but this is all you've been talking about for a week. And then I didn't even realize why I was reacting the way I did. But he went along with it, to Dave's credit. Dave's amazing. Poor Dave. But yeah, so it is sometimes just as hard to love an empath. If friendship, relationship, it doesn't matter. It's just as hard to love them as it is to be an empath sometimes. So
last week on the Sandy and Toddcast, Sandy shared a very, very personal story about some loss in her life. And we talked a little bit about the loss itself, but then we talked about how it tied into some paranormal stuff that happened with her. And if you missed it, you got to check out that podcast, because I will tell you this. First of all, we got a lot of conversation online about it.
Yeah.
But more so, the people who reached out to me and were like, I'm just listening to the podcast. Holy shit. Yeah. because you did some research, you did a little investigation, your name came through very loud and clear.
Yeah.
And so it was a very good podcast. Thank you for sharing that. Not only for the podcast reason, but I think that you helped a lot of people along the way. And in turn, you got a lot of response out of it. I think a lot of people sent you healing vibes and stuff.
Yeah, I did. I got a lot of people who actually, believe it or not, can relate to that situation. And it really made me happy. And, not just to share, the whole point of this podcast is for people. I was having a conversation with a wonderful woman who messaged me at the beginning of this past week and sort of told me her story, her life story. And we went back and forth in messages quite a bit. And the one thing I said to her, well, she said to me that she didn't feel as alone. And the one thing I said to her was, the main reason that you and I started this podcast was so that people realize that they're not alone. And it's not just in paranormal, psychic, medium,
woo-woo,
ghost hunting, woo-woo, any of that. It's just to know that you're not alone in the world is one of the most powerful things that you can experience. And so I really felt it was necessary to talk about my experience last week, regardless of whether I communicated with my friend who passed and received the responses that I received. Just the story itself, I think, might help people understand that you're not alone, what you feel. And now, 3 weeks into this whole thing of finding out about his passing, and I'm finally starting to get to the point where, how they say there's the different stages of grief, where that I'm finally starting to kind of accept it. I'm getting to the acceptance part of it. And like we talked about last week, I haven't lost anyone personally, like close to me in my life since my grandfather passed in 2001. So it's been 21 years since I lost someone. Now, I did lose my dog Jack in 2020. That's still huge for me. I'm still processing that because he was, my best friend. And I still cry pretty much every day. And I know there's people who get that completely. But a human loss I haven't had in 21 years. So Todd, it's one of the worst things to go through. You know that as well as I do. You've experienced that loss. But it's also freeing. As you process through it, you realize that it's freeing because it moves you to that next level of understanding. And so, good. I'm hoping that I did reach people with this story. It was hard to tell because you make yourself vulnerable because you're telling your feelings and your emotions. And it's really, really tough. But I hope it did help people. And I did have a lot of people reach out. And I'm glad people reached out to you as well, because it's the whole point of this podcast. I know we get silly and goofy and make fun of each other all the time, but it really is to make people aware of the fact that they're not alone in their experiences in life.
We were talking about like the different stages of grief and letting go and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And we're a little bit different in that, other than, this past situation that just happened. And then a long time ago with grandparents, mm-hmm. you really haven't had death in your life.
Yeah.
And I've had my fair share of it over the years, whether it was grandparents, aunts and uncles, my mom passing away, and now my dad seeming to be very close to passing.
Yeah.
And I always feel this way. I feel bad because I don't feel worse. So this wasn't something that I was going to discuss, but you kind of brought it up in your time, it feeling bad and moving on. And with all of the folks that have passed, there are people who I knew that they were going to go. Mm-hmm. I've had some tragedy with friends who have committed suicide that were a little bit more holy crap kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I always feel worse. I feel bad for not feeling worse about it in all those circumstances. I'm not somebody who breaks down and cries over it. Now, pets being put to sleep, pets being killed. I lose it for that. I lose it for, my dog Buddy had to be put down because he had cancer.
Right.
And when that happened, I remember crying for a couple of days, not completely, but I cried. And every once in a while I'll think of him and I'll tear up a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I think when Winston's time has come, that'll probably be the worst thing in my life.
Yeah.
But I always feel bad for not feeling worse. I don't know if it's because of a mindset where I realize that they're moving on to something better. I don't believe in heaven and hell and all that kind of stuff. But I think that, like you said, it's a freeing experience. I think they're being freed from the bullshit of everyday life on Earth. Mm-hmm. But for me, I don't know if this makes me a bad person. I'll just say that straight out. But when someone passes, it's just another change in life for me. It's another, they're not part of my life now, but they're still part of my life because my life is from the day I'm born to the day I die, at least my earthly life. And so even though they're not with me now, they're still a part of what my life is, the total story. They're still a chapter in my book or several chapters. So like when my mom died, I remember the night, my sister called and we knew she was passing. We knew she was very close. We knew almost within 24 hours of when it was going to happen because she was in hospice, and people in hospice can tell you the timeline of how it's going to happen. And then it happens exactly like that. They've seen it so often, Yeah. And so we found out, and I remember being sad and I cried a little bit. But I didn't lose it really hard. And then even at her funeral, I remember being okay during it after, they did the whole service and stuff. And we were walking back to the car. I stopped for a moment and I cried for maybe a couple minutes. Mm-hmm. And talking about it now, I tear up a little bit. I can feel the tears there.
Sure.
But I'm not overly sad. Now, I miss her very much. But, I had a good childhood. Mm-hmm. My parents were very good too. I mean, listen, all parents make mistakes and aren't the best.
Yeah.
But, they treated us kids very well as adults, the best they knew how. And I appreciate that. So I feel bad for not being, as distraught as maybe say you were last week or the week before. For me, it's just, I don't know if I just give up on it really quickly and just let it come and go, or if I'm shoving stuff down and not dealing with it. I'm not sure which one it is, but I really don't feel like I'm in a situation where I'm, one day going to wake up and go, about all the stuff that I've swept under the carpet. Because I just feel like I'm able to kind of let it go. And again, I feel bad for that because I feel like everybody expects you to act a certain way when you deal with certain things like death.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad. Thank you for sharing that. I'm really glad you brought that up because there's a few things to unpack here. First of all, it's interesting. I think that my reaction now, when my grandparents passed, and I mean, my grandparents essentially raised me, and I don't think there was anyone that I was closer to in my life for so many years than them, even when they were gone. But I cried like you, but I was very stoic with them. And now you're talking, I was 21 and 31. Grandmother 21, grandfather 31. I was very stoic. I think part of it, growing up, my mother used to say this to me all the time. You're almost like cold about things sometimes.
I feel that way about life.
Yes. And I'm going to throw something out there, Todd, and I'm not 100% sure that this may be what the cause is, but since it's an Empathecary podcast, I'm going to throw it out there. I've thought about it a lot over the years, and especially in the last 5 or 6 years since I've kind of known that I was an empath, that I don't know if maybe possibly we build up some sort of defense mechanism in our lives at times where as an empath, you can't process all of that You can't process the emotions. You can't process the pain as much as maybe somebody else does. And like you said, it's not that you're going to break down all of a sudden and look through the past 50 some years of your life and say, oh my God.
50
so
some
I said
years.
50 some.
I know,
you're
but
also
still.
a year and a week older than me, buddy. So, but it's not like you're going to just wake up. I won't just wake up and all of a sudden process everything that I seemingly, quote unquote, held down or repressed. But I do wonder if some of it is that. It's like this internal defense mechanism. You know, you learn about that when you're in school, defense mechanisms. And I just wonder if maybe that's what it is, because my mother will say to me, how can you be so cold about this or that, but yet emotional about other things? And I just don't know if it's sometimes certain things trigger me more than others. My defenses are down a little bit more for certain things, but it's just a thought that I figured I'd throw out there since you told that story. The other thing I wonder too is because this was a tragic death, a tragic passing that happened to me. It wasn't, you know, my grandmother died from cancer. My grandfather was in the nursing home and had had a stroke and had had several problems. And so I just sometimes wonder if there is a difference between how I reacted in this case, because it was tragic, and there comes with it a lot of what ifs. You know, what if we had some time together before he went? What if we had talked that last time before he went? But this one really hit me hard. I mean, you know, it really hit me hard.
Right. And like I said to you, though, like I've had friends commit suicide.
I know.
And still it was like, for me, it was more like, holy crap, how did that happen?
Right.
But I never really, I didn't necessarily grieve over it.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, I thought the same thing, too, because the way that he passed, and I don't want to really give a lot of details of the way, but the way that he passed was like, it was like the perfect moment. You know, he came together with the other thing, and it just, if he had been 5 minutes too late or 5 minutes earlier, that wouldn't have happened. And it just kind of makes you question life and the timing of everything and how things work. I had an incident, probably 15 years ago at least, where I was going to work and I was running late for work that day. And 5 minutes before on my usual route to work, it was winter, somebody had slid down a hill and hit another car and died right where I would have been if I had been there 5 minutes earlier. And so things like that just make you think. And also the other thing I want to talk about real quick from your story is it's really important for everybody to understand that we all grieve differently and nobody's wrong. We all grieve differently. My brother, who again was basically, I'm the oldest of six. My brother, who's the next youngest from me, he and my grandparents, essentially, I would say 75% of our lives until they passed, we lived with them. He didn't go to either wake or funeral of either of my grandparents. He couldn't handle it. And people were like, well, why wouldn't he go? It's his grandparents. He was so close to them and everything. But I said, you know, who am I to judge whether he goes to the wake and funeral? I went, but I'm not him. Who are we to judge how someone deals with grief? It's just everybody deals with it in their own way. And it's so important to understand that. You know, some people like to have parties when someone they love passed away. That's their thought process. Let's have a big celebration of their life. Some people want to wear all black and do the traditional. I was raised Catholic most of my life, and you had 2 days worth of wake, and then you had the funeral, and you wore all black, and you looked sad, and you didn't do this, and you didn't do that. And it was like a whole 3-day freaking affair. But, you know, if somebody doesn't want to do that, or does, it's their right to do that. And it's important to remember that we all do grieve differently. So
one other thing I wanted to mention is I know we've talked about it on the Empathecary podcast before, is how a lot of people will reach out to me looking for the guidance, looking for answers, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then I will just say, have you ever thought that maybe you're an empath? And that happens a lot to me, and it happened again this week. And I wanted to say this because there is a really funny meme out there. It's Kermit the Frog on the bicycle, and he's getting the hell out of, the fire and brimstone stuff going on Earth. And it says, when you're an empath and you're getting the hell away from all the bullshit. And then you see him going back into the fire on the bicycle, but then you realize you're put here to help heal people. Okay. I love that one. And so I had the conversation with this individual this week who was really going through a tough time. And I just said, yes, you're here to guide. You're here to heal. You're here for answers, all that. But it's not your job to make sure that individual takes the information that you've given, that you've shared, and do something with it. And I said, you need to learn that once you've given that wisdom, given that bit of information, if they don't do something with it, not your problem.
Nope.
Not your problem. And more importantly, if that is a string of events that happen over and over and over, got to cut them out. Snip, motherfuckers, as somebody used to say.
I'm so glad that you said that because, and yes, we have discussed this before, but it's important to say it again, is that I actually have more so than you, I think, embraced being an empath because I've always been that sort of person. People come to me, strangers come to me out of nowhere and start telling me their life stories because they want some sort of guidance or assistance or validation, and they're drawn to me. And so I'm the one. And when I can help people, obviously, my personality and who I am.
Oh, God.
I do.
Right.
I do. But there's such a thing called self-care, taking care of yourself. You know how when you're on the airplane, I never thought of it this way, and this just came into my head. You know how you're on the airplane and they always go through that thing where they say, if you need oxygen, put your mask on first and then help the people around you.
Right.
Because obviously, if you don't have oxygen, you can't help anybody else. So help yourself first. And God, I'm a genius. I never thought about that before. But yes, that's exactly what it is. Put your oxygen mask on first. Save yourself first. If it gets to be too much, step back. You can only tell them something once. And if they don't want to hear it and they keep coming back to the well and coming back to the well and coming back to the well, I'm going to put the top on that well and then I'm going to walk away. Because you can't let people keep draining you. And you can't tell people the same thing 15 times only to know that they're not going to listen to you and they're going to continue on that path.
Right. Or they decide that their way is better. Which, listen, I'm not, my way is not always right. Although if you ask me, I'm always right. But if you want to go a different path, that's up to you. That's great. Here's the other thing. Don't waste my time in asking me what I think and then do something else. That's called, we've talked about this too on somewhere on the pod. It's being an ask hole. ASKHOLE, an ask hole. Don't do it. Don't bother me with your trivial shit. I don't need it. I've got enough shit to do in my own life. I don't need yours. I
always say, why are you even asking me if you're not going to listen to what I'm telling you?
Right.
And I have plenty of people who come to me and I give them advice and I help them through things. And I'm so happy and honored to be able to do that. But I don't understand why you're coming to me if you're just not going to listen to me anyways. Do the complete opposite and screw your life up even more. I don't know what to tell you from that. So, yeah, that's a really good point. Really good point.
So we're going to keep this one short this week. Do you have a quick story you said you had to share?
Oh, my gosh. Okay. I have when I get bored or when I'm trying to take a break, I always look around for just weird news stories because they just humor me. And I saw this one and I had to share it with everybody because it's just so stupid. It's on HuffPost. It's under the weird news section. And it says, man accused of killing friend claims it was to stop him from summoning Sasquatch.
Oh, yeah.
So of course I'm going to click on it because how could I not click on it, right? So apparently what happened, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of noodling. I guess noodling is fishing basically with your hands.
Okay.
So a man in Oklahoma was noodling, and I guess he reportedly confessed to killing his fishing partner, claiming that he did it because his fishing partner told him that he was going to feed him to Sasquatch. And so the guy apparently tried to get away from him so that now I'm assuming there had to be some kind of drugs or something involved at some point, because then they were both trying to get away from each other so that one didn't summon Sasquatch, and then the one who was supposed to summon Sasquatch was trying to get away so that Sasquatch wouldn't eat him too. Now, can you just see this?
Yes.
Isn't this like some kind of a cartoon going on? Like I said, there has to be some kind of alcohol or drug use in there somewhere. They fought with each other over an hour to get away from each other. So I don't know why they didn't just run in opposite directions, but they apparently fought with each other first. And so the guy actually, in all seriousness, choked the guy to death and then went home and told his daughter, who was dating the guy's son that he killed.
Oh, my gosh. What is this, Florida this happened? Or what?
This was Oklahoma.
Okay, same thing.
Yep, same thing. So, he's already been on probation for 2 drug-related cases. So can you imagine, and now he's, of course, facing first-degree murder, but can you imagine, like, driving by a fishing hole and seeing these two fighting with each other, not realizing why they're fighting with each other? Because Sasquatch is going to come and eat one of them, and instead of running away from each other, they're fighting. I just don't even understand it, what kind of world they were living in at the time. But yeah, so that was probably the weirdest news story of my week, and you're all very welcome for that.
Thank you for that. Let's do this.
But I did learn what noodling was because I had no idea. So you learned something new. Let's
check out our spiel. Shall we do that?
Let's go to our spiel right now.
You can find the Sandy and Toddcast on any of the platforms that you normally find your podcasts, including YouTube and Twitter. Be sure to like the Sandy and Toddcast on Facebook to keep up on the latest goings-on, including each week's episode. You can also join our group, Stay Weirdos, Friends of the Sandy and Toddcast, for more fun. Stay Weirdos is a safe place to share your thoughts, feelings, ideas, and random inappropriate memes without judgment. Sandy and Todd also have a podcast called the Empathecary Podcast. It's for empaths, by empaths. And if you know an empath, you might want to listen too. Find and like the page on Facebook. And finally, if you're thinking about starting your own podcast and just aren't sure where to start, Sandy and Todd can also help with that too. Mindgarden Media is their latest project where the dynamic duo can guide you every step of the way in your podcasting journey. Editing, producing, and consulting is what they do. Like Mindgarden Media on Facebook or email them at themindgardenmedia@gmail.com. And as always, thanks for staying weird.
Thanks again to Dan Woodward for our spiel. Always enjoy that.
Dan is amazing. I love the UK accent. I love it, love it, love it, love it. I say UK because I tie everybody together with all the different...
That's the problem. They're all very different accents
right,
up there.
That's why I love them all. So I kind of...
Yeah.
The only one that's really hard is I think it's the Cockney accent because it's so thick and so strong. That one's a little bit harder. Weren't you on a
I'm just going to say something. I'm just going to say something. The fact that you said Cockney and thick and strong all together, just can we end the podcast on that, please? Let's not even go any further. All right?
All right, let's do it.
All right, until next time when we'll have another Sandy and Toddcast. Bye.
Bye.